I'd like to ask the Chairman of the Post Office what the four options being presented to the focus groups being conducted by IJS Consulting on behalf of the Post Office are, how they were developed, what other options were considered but not included, and when these options were considered and approved by the Post Office Board.
On the Vice Chairman of the Post Office, Ms. Tanya Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the question was originally directed at me, I have prepared an answer. In consultation with the focus groups facilitator, IJS, which is a Market Research Society accredited organisation, the Isle of Man Post Office has developed a discussion guide to provide structure and consistency for each of the 5 focus groups. As part of that guide, the Isle of Man Post Office provided 4 concepts, not options, for discussion. These concepts were taken from the public consultation, which was approved by the Isle of Man Post Office Board on the 31st of May 2018, last year, and subsequently noted by the Council of Ministers on the 9th of August 2018, the same year. The 4 concepts were to keep the network as is, consolidate the network, introduce outreach offices, or increase the provision of self-service kiosks. As approved by Tynwald in December 2018, it was agreed that the Isle of Man Post Office would return in October 2019 to present the retail strategy. Later on this year, as part of this Tynwald decision, it was agreed that the Isle of Man Post Office would take further analysis of the public consultation results via the focus groups to gain a deeper understanding of public opinion. The work that was undertaken with those focus groups will assist the business in establishing its retail strategy, which will be presented to the Isle of Man Post Office Board prior to coming to Tynwald. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank the Vice Chairman for that answer. I was advised by the Tynwald Clerk's Office that the Chairman would be answering, so I apologise for the confusion. The question I've got here, the 4 options or the 4 discussion points that were just listed are subtly different to those 4 that have been reported by people who have attended the focus groups, including a Manx radio journalist who reported on their website. One of the discussion points that was reported was suggested to be a £47 increase in rates per person per year. I wonder if the Vice Chairman could provide some clarity on exactly what that means, what that option refers to, because it wasn't referred to at all in her answer.
Reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I wasn't there, I have absolutely no idea as to what certain individuals may have queried of the Post Office from what they haven't. But of the concepts, just to give you an outline of exactly what those concepts were, the concept to keep the network as is, the Isle of Man currently provides the highest density of post office in the British Isles, and declining transaction volumes have an impact on the viability of each office, not only for the Isle of Man Post Office, but also for each of the independent sub-postmasters, those businesses. So if the network was kept at the current size, a government or national, local or national subsidy would be required. So as an example, in 2018-19, the Isle of Man Post Office network made a loss of £1.5 million, as we know. If the network was subsidised, this would translate to an average impact of £47 per tax-paying residents, to answer that question. Concept B of the consolidation of the network was a reduced amount of post offices to generate a reduction in operational costs as well as an increase of revenue for each separate post office. That makes the post office more viable for the sub-postmasters. Concept C was to introduce the outreach offices, providing the post office services on specific days or times within another location. For example, the Commissioner's Church or community halls or some level of bus idea. Concept D, increase the provision of the self-service kiosks. So the kiosks can be located in convenient locations around the island, could be, and provide easy access to the main post office services, so the purchase of stamps, posting letters, parcels, bill payment, and so forth. Thank you, Mr. President.
Honourable Member Mr. Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am somewhat surprised to learn that a member of the Post Office Board has no idea what is being discussed at some of these focus groups. That is quite shocking. Would the honourable member not agree that the 4 options being presented are rather uninspiring? Primarily seem to revolve around reducing the level of service on offer or simply finding alternative ways of screwing more money out of the Manx taxpayer. I wonder if the honourable member would agree with me that the Post Office is at quite a vital crossroads right now, and this sort of limited and outdated slash-and-burn thinking is not going to get the Post Office to where it needs to be to revitalise itself into a vibrant 21st century communications organisation.
On the Vice Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just like to suggest to the honourable member that if he feels that improvements to the organisation's business operations or the board's decision-making or any other operational matters, that perhaps that he might consider coming in and speaking to the board or the executive before putting questions forward either in this place or in another place. I would also like to add that the research so far is not complete. As the honourable member is aware, in the research process, work streams need to be allowed to take their course to conclusion. Limitations in any research project, they come at the end of a piece, not in the middle or, sort of at the start. Thank you, Mr. President.
Honourable member, can I just make it perfectly plain that it is the absolute right of members of Tynwald to put questions in this place, quite irrespective of whether they may or may not be going into the department ahead of time. That is their right. That is what they're here for. Mr. Hooper? No. I beg your pardon. Mr. Baker.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd just like to ask the Vice Chairman to clarify her original answer, where she referred to the Alderman Post Office being required to bring back its retail strategy to October Tynwald. Can she actually confirm that actually what it's required by this Honourable Court to bring back is a vision for the future of the Alderman Post Office? And furthermore, can she please give this Honourable Court some confidence that there is a future, a more positive future for the Alderman Post Office, which is going to embrace repurposing this highly valued institution in a positive way to play a role in the delivery of either public or communications or any other services, because the distinct impression that she's given by her answer is that there's one path for the Alderman Post Office, and it's a path of managed decline and eventual closure of Alderman Post Office.
On the Vice Chair to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can give the honourable member some level of reassurance. The Isle of Man Post Office is absolutely determined to try and get itself out of the situation that it's in, and it has to look to various other options that sit outside of its current path in order to do that. So the research process that's underway at the moment, the attempt is to look at more innovative ways for it to move forward, and also any level of sort of understanding from the public, a deeper understanding from the public following the public consultation is going to help in that regard. Yes, it's hoping to construct a vision for the future, and it is positive in that regard, yes. Thank you, Mr. President.
Honourable Member for Ramsey, Dr. Allinson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask the Vice Chair about her statement that the network made a loss. When she says that, is she talking about the distribution network of the Post Office? Because it was my understanding that it was only an updated actuarial calculation that gave a paper loss for the Post Office in the last financial year.
Vice Chair to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, the honourable member is quite right.
Honourable Member for Ramsey, Mr. Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. One of the original parts of the question that I asked that has not been answered is what other options, proposals, discussion, whatever you want to call them, Honourable Member, what other options were considered but not included? And following on from that, if these four options really did come from the public consultation, this idea of a blanket subsidy, a blanket level of tax contribution actually wasn't mentioned in the public consultation document. What was presented to the public was the option of maintaining services as they are, but making up the financial losses that may be being incurred as a result of other commercial services. That's the language that the document is phrased in, not by the language of a subsidy. So I'd like to get confirmation from the honourable member of exactly where this idea of a postal network taxpayer subsidy has come from, because it certainly didn't come from the Manx public.
Ms. August Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. President. That wasn't part of the public consultation, you're quite right. It was an idea that came about in a workshop that took up with the Post Office Board and also the Executive. We have to explore all avenues. It's not something that's concrete, it's not something that's been decided upon. The Post Office can't decide on anything like that. So it would need to, it's to gauge a level of understanding from the public as to whether or not there's any appetite for it in order to have those conversations should there be an appetite. Thank you, Mr. President.
Honourable Member Miss Edge.
Thank you, Mr President. Does the Vice Chair of Alderman Post Office, I hope she agrees with me, it would be more helpful if members in this Honourable Court actually supported Alderman Post Office going forward with the changes that are required. There was a loss in the retail network. It's quite clear from some of the questions today that there's a complete lack of understanding of what Isle of Man Post Office currently is and the services it provides. The honourable gentleman to my left here from Ramsey would, what I'd like to say to the Vice Chair is, does she not agree that our sponsoring department members should be supporting Isle of Man Post Office going forward and looking at the right ways forward for Isle of Man Post Office? Some suggestions that have come forward, which the honourable member hopefully can confirm, have been cut it down to a 3-day week. These have come from our sponsoring department. This is not support that the Isle of Man Post Office currently needs, and we need support from every member. Does the honourable member agree with me that we need support from all members in here to make sure we've got an Isle of Man Post Office that's financially responsible for the future going forward for the people of the Isle of Man?
Excellent. Point of order. Point of order. The sponsoring department has not recommended the Post Office move to a 3-day week.
Absolutely not.
Apologise.
Mr President, I'm happy to comment on that. There has been suggestions. I perhaps should have been clearer that it's not necessarily come from the sponsoring department. There's been numerous suggestions, but the sponsoring department does need to be on board with us and support us through this process.
The issue has been raised. Vice Chair.
Thank you. I know there's a bit of ill feeling in the court at the moment, so I just want to address that.
No, you'll address the
Yes,
question.
I will. I will address the question. Yes.
This is not a debate, honourable members. This is a question and answer session.
Thank you.
You were invited by the questioner to agree with a certain proposition.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes.
There needs to be a level of positivity in relation to the Post Office. There needs to be some level of consensus and understanding and support in order to get it from the position that it's in at the moment to one that leads into the future. And this is answering the Chairman's question quite clearly and the point of order that was raised by the Minister for Enterprise. The Isle of Man Post Office is in a state of transition, and it needs a little bit more vision, it needs a little bit more innovation, it needs support, and it needs all government departments and all ministers to come together and give it a future. It needs members to give it a future. It needs businesses outside of itself to help give it a future by communicating with it. At the moment, what I've seen thus far as a board member is that there are certain departments throughout government that don't necessarily give it the level of support that perhaps it could have into the future, and therefore it does get held back by that. Thank you, Mr.
Member for Council, Mr. Cretney.
If I could ask the Vice Chairman, and forgive me if I missed the point here, but could you confirm or otherwise whether the various options that are being considered, one of them includes the provision of hubs for the delivery of government services via the Post Office around the island?
Ms. August Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, one of those options is being considered. It is. We're very, very aware of the idea of bringing community hubs together and what that might look like. At the moment, it from person to person, it sort of differs ever so slightly. And what we need is a clear understanding of exactly what's wanted, and perhaps the Isle of Man Post Office can fit into that network. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. Hooper.
Thank you, Mr. President. I might be the only one getting quite confused here, but I'd like to think that the honourable member would agree with me that it's the job of this honourable court to provide scrutiny to protect the Manx people, not to blindly support executive policy that may end up doing more harm than good. The question I'd like to ask the honourable member is this started off by me asking what those 4 options being presented were. And it seems that there were 4 options that are being presented that Actually, there may have been 5 or 6 options that were presented, because now we've just heard another one, community hubs. That wasn't mentioned in the original answer. And then originally these answers, these options, these ideas came from the public consultation, but now it turns out there were workshops where some of these ideas may or may not have come from. So I'm going to go right back to the start of this question and ask the honourable member again to answer the question that was tabled. Where did these ideas come from? What are these ideas? And actually, how on earth can we believe anything that is being said when the initial answers we're getting are not the whole truth?
Ms. August Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Post Office doesn't really have anything to hide. It just doesn't. You're asking the who, what, where, why, when, and how. Okay, fine. Yes, the workshops, the workshop that took place with the board and the executive has fed into some of this. The public consultation has fed into some of this. The strategy itself that was put forward has fed into this. The Post Office is looking for direction. It's looking for a direction to move forward. So the community hubs, nobody has a clear understanding or idea of exactly what they want them to entail. So how can the Isle of Man Post Office fix into that when it's not necessarily its responsibility at present to bring those together and get them going? There is no sort of consensus on what the words community hub actually mean at present.
Mr. Baker.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Very, very interesting set of responses to what was quite a straightforward question, I thought, from my honourable friend from Ramsey. And can the Vice Chairman please clarify, when she says the Post Office is looking for direction, can she please clarify whose job it is to come up with a vision to be presented to this honourable court in October, and make it really clear whose job that actually is?
Ms. August Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's the Isle of Man Post Office's job to bring that forward, and that's what it's trying to do with the research that is currently underway. It's by no means concluded. It is in progress at present, and down the line it will be presented, and it will be the Isle of Man Post Office that presents it. Thank you.
Mr. Baker.
Just to be really clear, and apologies for being so precise, when you say the Isle of Man Post Office, do you mean the board of Isle of Man Post Office?
Ms. August Hanson.
Yes.
Ms. Edge.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the Vice Chair agree with me that there's still a lot of work to be done before we present our report to this honourable court in October? There's various work streams currently underway with various other options. These were just simple questions to start the process with a focus group, and they were to get discussion going. We've had lots of discussion, we've got lots of responses, we're collating them. Does the honourable member agree with me that we need to be given that opportunity to come back to Tynwald in October and present our report?
August Hanson.
Thank you. Yes, I absolutely do. And like I said, the research isn't complete, as the research process, we'll look at the limitations and the problems with it once it's actually been given a chance to find its way to completion. It is nowhere near complete as of yet, which is the reason why it's not been reported back to this honourable court as of yet. Thank you, Mr. President.
Final supplementary, Mr. Hood.
Thank you, Mr. President. Definitely a final one from me. So the Post Office consulted on its strategy and got 2,500 responses. But actually it turns out that consultation wasn't adequate. And now they're going in and further developing things which actually weren't in that consultation in the first place. Can the honourable member please advise how many people are being involved in these focus groups and why it was felt appropriate to continually narrow the number of people that they're engaging with rather than actually trying to engage with the broader Manx public and the broader users of the Post Office service and, of course, Tynwald members?
August Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to give you an outline then of the selection criteria for the focus groups. They were aimed at younger participants to outweigh the older demographic of the public consultation responses. They were from mixed locations, contacting all public consultation respondents as well who volunteered to participate in the focus groups and extending through social media to a younger audience. The Isle of Man Post Office had the first contract and passed data from all of the interesting respondents to the IJS, the facilitator, who randomised the list of respondents looking for a mix of MyCard and non-MyCard users, as well as 18 to 45-year-olds and 45-year-old plus, by each of the locations, and followed this up with a call to find out whether or not there would be a specific date suiting the potential participant. Everyone who accepted to take part was allocated then to a particular group. I mean, it's a piece of research. We've tried to do the best that we can, or IJS has tried to do the best that it can. But again, it's in the middle of the research process at the moment, so we can't deliver answers halfway through a research process.